Well, here we are, nearly a year and a half later, doing part two of How to Fail Well. I noticed, or certain astute viewers brought to my attention, that I never did part two of this video, and so I'm going to try to do it now, which is interesting because I have only the faintest, foggiest idea of where I was going next with my discussion, but let me jump right in as if 15 months didn't just go by. So you attempted, we were drawing the example of someone who attempted to start a cupcake shop, and it failed. It went out of business. It goes bankrupt. And you have to close your doors. At that point, you have your initial reaction, you have your painful feelings, you have your instinctive, automatic attempt to push those feelings away and not feel them, and you go through all that. And then when the dust settles, then the question is still there. Okay, now what's next? So one might do well to look at what underlying values drove the decision to open a cupcake shop. So for instance, if it was to have an adventure, maybe it wasn't, but let's say for you or this person who opened the cupcake shop, whoever it was to have a sort of adventure, to risk something and have an interesting time and possibly have it pay off a lot. Well, while one's appetite to start a new business may or may not still be there, one can probably have an adventure in a very different way. Maybe the stakes could be a little lower, or maybe they could be different kinds of stakes. Maybe we don't have to go make the rounds to our relatives again and gather up capital and do something that perhaps we weren't cut out to do, or maybe we do choose to do that. No, I was cut out to do this. I'm going to go about it a little differently this time. And if you read biographies of the lives of the entrepreneurs, a lot of them did have failures of this kind early in their history. But, if you're more like me and you're not that entrepreneurial, maybe you don't go and open another business, but you do look at why you did it in the first place. And if the reason was, for instance, primarily for adventure or to have a lot of contact with people, maybe you go off on an adventure traveling around the world for a number of months or a year and meet a lot of people that way. Maybe you write an article or a book about it. So you instantiate, you bring about in the world that which will fulfill those values or put them into action that just didn't happen to work out in the last way that you attempted it. And of course, failing well could also mean that you come back to a project later, much as I did with this particular video, albeit my stakes were not very high in making part two of it. There were only about 250 people who watched part one, so no harm in making part two. But the general idea is that maybe it's worth coming back to something. I practiced Kung Fu for a year and a half. I used it as an example in my classes that I taught. And then I quit for a year and a half and didn't find any other form of exercise to replace it, and concluded the thing to do was to come back to Kung Fu. Was that pleasant to come back? Not particularly. But was it useful? Did it fulfill the values that I wanted it to fulfill? The original values of why I started practicing Kung Fu, that I wanted to be more healthy, more strong, more flexible? Why, yes. And once again, I am doing it maybe not as much as I feel I should, or my mind tells me I should, but I'm doing it. And I'm past the point where I'm not flagellating myself anymore for having dropped out of it for a year and a half. For that matter, martial arts I dropped out of from age 14 to age 40 something, 42. So there was that 28-year gap. And if I had been too concerned about that, I wouldn't have gotten back into it at 42, much less back into it again at 45. So I think this probably adequately rounds out where I was going with that video, in as much as I can reconstruct it. And for those who need to have where there's a part one, there needs to be part two. I could have gone back in and just erased the part one part of the title, but it was obvious I was interrupted by the phone, so that would have been kind of cheesy. And I also wanted to model in my video what I'm talking about, that we can salvage things. We can go back and dust something off, and we can finish it. It's not comfortable always to do so. It's not necessarily instinctively what we want in the sense of, I want an ice cream cone, but it might be what we really desire deep down. I'm making sort of a false cut between want and desire, but it may be valued action without being super appetizing, which is an interesting thing. I think I'll take it there before I make this any more of a failure than it already is. But I think I have succeeded in getting across at least one or two of my points that I meant to in this two-part series. And onward and upward.